Have you ever wondered how close the world has come to complete destruction? Not in a movie, not in fiction, but in real life. There was a moment in history when the entire planet stood just a few decisions away from nuclear war. A moment when the most powerful nations on Earth were preparing their weapons. Missiles were ready, bombers were fueled, armies were on high alert, and millions of people had no idea that their world could disappear in minutes. For 13 long days in October 1962, the future of humanity depended on a handful of decisions made by world leaders. This was the moment when the United States and the Soviet Union came closer to nuclear war than ever before. A crisis that history now remembers as the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the story of those 13 days is one of the most frightening chapters in human history. To understand how this crisis began, we must go back to the early years of the Cold War. After World War II, two powerful nations emerged as global superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Both countries had very different political systems. The United States supported democracy and capitalism. The Soviet Union promoted communism. Because of these differences, trust between them quickly disappeared. Instead of fighting directly, the two countries entered a long period of tension known as the Cold War. During the Cold War, both sides competed to build stronger weapons, and the most dangerous weapon of all was the nuclear bomb. Nuclear weapons were powerful enough to destroy entire cities in seconds. By the late 1950s and early 1960s, both the United States and the Soviet Union had built thousands of nuclear weapons. Each side feared the other might attack first, and this fear created a dangerous balance. If one country launched its missiles, the other would launch theirs, and the result would be catastrophic. While these tensions were growing, something important was happening much closer to the United States. Just 90 miles from the coast of Florida lies the island nation of Cuba. In 1959, a revolution changed the country forever. A leader named Fidel Castro came to power. Castro established a communist government in Cuba. This worried the United States. The idea of a communist nation so close to American borders was seen as a serious threat. Because of this, relations between the United States and Cuba quickly became hostile. But Cuba was not alone. The Soviet Union saw an opportunity. They began supporting Cuba politically and militarily, and soon a secret plan began to form. In 1962, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev made a bold decision. He secretly ordered nuclear missiles to be placed in Cuba. These were not ordinary weapons. These missiles could carry nuclear warheads capable of destroying entire cities. And because Cuba was so close to the United States, these missiles could reach major American cities in just minutes. The missiles were transported quietly. Construction crews began building launch sites across the island, but everything was done in secret. The Soviet Union hoped the United States would not discover the plan until it was too late. But in October 1962, something unexpected happened. An American spy plane flying over Cuba took photographs of the island. When intelligence analysts examined the images, they saw something shocking. Missile launch sites, under construction, right in Cuba. The evidence was clear. The Soviet Union was placing nuclear missiles within striking distance of the United States. When this information reached the White House, it created immediate alarm. The President of the United States at that time was John F. Kennedy. Kennedy understood how serious the situation was. If the missiles became operational, they could threaten millions of American lives. But reacting too quickly could also start a nuclear war.
Kennedy gathered his closest advisors. Together, they debated what to do.
Some military leaders suggested launching an airstrike to destroy the missile sites. Others proposed invading Cuba. But both options carried enormous risks. The Soviet Union might retaliate, and if that happened, nuclear war could begin. After days of tense discussions, President Kennedy made a different decision. Instead of attacking immediately, he announced a naval blockade around Cuba. This meant that American warships would stop and inspect ships heading toward the island. The goal was to prevent more Soviet weapons from reaching Cuba. At the same time, Kennedy demanded that the Soviet Union remove the missiles already on the island. This announcement shocked the world. For the first time, the crisis became public. News spread quickly across the globe. People everywhere began to worry. If the two superpowers could not find a peaceful solution, nuclear war might be unavoidable. The next 13 days were some of the most tense days in human history. American military forces were placed on high alert. Strategic bombers carrying nuclear weapons were prepared for immediate launch. Missile bases across the United States were ready to fire if necessary. At the same time, Soviet forces were also preparing for the possibility of war. Both sides were ready. Both sides were afraid. And the entire world waited. Each day, messages were exchanged between Washington and Moscow. Some were public, others were secret. The goal was simple: avoid war, but find a solution. At one point during the crisis, tensions nearly exploded. An American spy plane was shot down over Cuba. The pilot was killed. This moment could have triggered military retaliation. Many advisors urged President Kennedy to respond immediately, but Kennedy chose patience. Instead of launching an attack, he continued searching for a diplomatic solution. Behind the scenes, negotiations were taking place, and slowly, a possible agreement began to emerge. Finally, after nearly 2 weeks of tension, a deal was reached. The Soviet Union agreed to remove its nuclear missiles from Cuba. In return, the United States promised not to invade Cuba. But there was also a secret part of the agreement. The United States quietly agreed to remove its own nuclear missiles from Turkey. These missiles had also been threatening the Soviet Union. With this compromise, the crisis finally began to end. Soviet ships turned around, missile sites in Cuba were dismantled, and the world stepped back from the edge of nuclear war. The Cuban Missile Crisis lasted only 13 days, but its impact was enormous. It showed how dangerous nuclear weapons could be. It also showed how quickly misunderstandings between nations could escalate into global catastrophe. After the crisis, both the United States and the Soviet Union realized the need for better communication. They established a direct hotline between Washington and Moscow. This allowed leaders to speak directly during future emergencies. The crisis also led to new efforts to control nuclear weapons. Treaties were later signed to limit nuclear testing and reduce the risk of war. Today, historians still study the Cuban Missile Crisis as one of the most dangerous moments in modern history. For 13 days, the fate of humanity hung in the balance. A few decisions, made by a handful of leaders, determined whether the world would move forward or be destroyed. Fortunately, diplomacy and patience prevailed, and humanity survived one of the greatest threats it has ever faced. History often teaches us important lessons. The Cuban Missile Crisis reminds us how fragile peace can be, and how important communication, restraint, and leadership are during times of crisis. Because sometimes the difference between peace and catastrophe is just one decision, one conversation, or one moment of patience. If you enjoy discovering powerful and forgotten moments from history like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next story. And if this story surprised you, let us know your thoughts in the comments below, because history still has many secrets waiting to be uncovered.